You're getting married. You want to know, do I need a prenup? Hi, I'm John Strohmeyer with Strohmeyer Law. Today we're talking about a question that comes up a lot for those who are looking to get married. Do we need a prenup? I'm licensed here in Texas, and Texas is a community property jurisdiction. This means that all property owned by spouses during their marriage is going to fall in one of two categories under this system. This means either the property is going to be community property, in which case both spouses have an interest in it, or it's going to be separate property, in which case it only belongs to one of those spouses. Now, this is going to have a lot of profound implications when the marriage comes to an end. This can either be during divorce or when one of the spouses dies. So, as a quick refresher, what is community property? Well, the easy answer is it's anything that spouses acquire during a marriage while they're married in Texas. Separate property, then, is only going to be a few exceptions. First, it's going to be anything owned by either spouse before the marriage. So, common misconception is that once you get married, everything that you have magically turns into community property. This is not the case. So once you get married, everything you own, whether it's your socks, your bank account, or your car, that remains your separate property. You came into the marriage with it, you get to leave the marriage with it. Anything acquired after you get married, though, is going to be community property. Item number two that's going to be separate property, anything acquired by either spouse as a gift, bequest, or devise during the marriage. This is going to be treated as separate property. This can cause a lot of confusion. So if a relative dies and leaves you something in their will, that's going to be your separate property, even if you're married. Likewise, on the day of your marriage, when you're getting all those gifts, those actually aren't community property. It's a gift to both of you, so it's actually a gift of separate property to each of you. So if we think about a $100 bill gifted to each of the spouses, well, one spouse will have a half separate property interest in that $100 bill, and the other spouse will have a one half separate property interest in that same bill. It's not community property, and neither one can take the entire bill for themselves. It's both theirs, but as split community property. The last category of separate property are going to be recoveries from personal injuries. So basically, if you're in a car wreck or something like that, where you get injured and you recover money damages for that, that's going to be your separate property. There's nothing really about the community when you alone get injured. So, just as a quick recap, three broad exceptions to anything being community property. First, anything you bring into the marriage. Second, anything you received by gift, bequest, or devise. Finally, any recovery for personal injuries. All right, one last little wrinkle on this. What if you have separate property that generates income? You have a rental house that you brought into the marriage, and that generates rental payments. Those rental payments, income from the separate property, is going to be community property. So there are a lot of ins and outs on who owns what. What does this mean? Well, when we start thinking about a marriage, we want to think about who's going to own what when the marriage comes to an end. So, for a lot of first time marriages, this really isn't going to be a big deal. If you're not bringing much into the marriage, probably because you're in your 20s or early 30s and getting married for the first time, there's a good chance you don't have a whole lot on your balance sheet that you're trying to protect. A lot of cases say maybe we don't even need a prenup. But for those of you who are still thinking about it, why do we want to think about it and what do we want to think about? Well, what we're trying to do is figure out what's going to happen during the marriage. Are there reasons that we want to allocate certain property to certain people? Maybe we want to make sure that certain assets are clearly labeled as the separate property of one spouse or the other. As a comparison, I once worked on an Oregon marital property agreement. And one of the things that I learned was that an interest in a trust for the benefit of one spouse, even if it was created by that spouse's family and never listed the new spouse as a beneficiary, that new spouse, even though they weren't a member of the family, even though they were never listed as a beneficiary, could potentially claim an interest in that trust if they ever got divorced. This is going to be a shock for a lot of people, probably outside of Oregon, but just thinking through what are the things that are on your balance sheet that may end up being on the table during a divorce. So, if we're thinking that we need to make sure we know who owns what and why, what do we want to do when we get started with a prenup? Well, first things first, when are you getting married? The more lead time we have for this agreement, the better. We want to make sure that we've got time to negotiate both our provisions on our side of the agreement, but also working with the other attorney who's going to be representing the other spouse. Both of you are going to need to have an attorney. This is not a case where once somebody came to me and said, "Hey, my fiance and I agree. Will you just draft up one marital agreement for both of us?" The answer is no, I can't. We need both parties to be represented. And if one attorney is drafting the agreement for both sides, it's going to be the first thing to go. That agreement's not going to be worth anything. So we want to make sure we've got enough time between now and the marriage to make sure that we can get the agreement negotiated, signed, and sealed before everybody walks down the aisle. Consideration number two, what does each spouse own? As part of this agreement, each spouse is going to have to disclose everything they own to the other. Now, we don't need to get into 3 pairs of red socks and 2 pairs of blue socks, but we do need to know roughly how big their financial pie is and how big each slice of that pie is. Why? It's just fair to make sure that each party knows what they're giving up in terms of future income or future community assets. They have a right to know, and if you don't tell them, and they don't tell you, it's a reason to unwind the entire agreement. So know that you're going to need to have a good list of all your assets going into this. Next, think about what sort of agreement do you want in place? Are we just confirming what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine? Or are you trying to set up some other type of agreement where on each birth of a child, you're setting aside certain amounts of money going forward for that child's care and education? Or are you thinking about, well, if something happens, we want to make sure that this amount of provision is left for the spouse to ensure that they're taken care of. There are all sorts of things that can go into an agreement, and you want to make sure that if you have some sort of expectation on who will own what or what you're going to receive, and it means this much to you, you want to get it in writing so you've got something to back you up later. The last thing to think about is this the first marriage for each spouse? Now, as I mentioned before, for a lot of spouses, this is going to be something that they think about but don't actually go through with. For a lot of first marriages, you really don't need to do a whole lot. You can set up your accounts in such a way that you'll keep your separate property separate, and you'll keep any income that would be community property in a different account. You can talk to your financial advisors about how to set that up. So in a lot of cases, you may be able to get what you're looking for, keeping yours yours, keeping theirs theirs, keeping yours together with some creative account management. But sometimes you want to think, well, maybe this does make sense. So when does it really make sense? Well, second marriage. You've already been through the process once. You want to make sure you keep what you have. A lot of times in second marriages, you'll have kids that you want to make sure that you're protecting, and you want to make sure that your property goes to your children, no matter how much you care about your new spouse. Another reason, and you have family assets that you want to make sure remain yours. This is important for a lot of families. We have this interest in this house, or this trust is coming for you. Your inheritance remains yours. It's not that we don't like your new spouse, but we're not providing for them, and we want it to be clear that what is yours stays with you and your kids. The third reason to have a prenup is you may be getting pressure from other family members just to make sure you're protecting things. Again, this is a reason that some people go through this. They want to make sure that their children are protected because of their own experiences. There's nothing wrong with this, but do realize that this is a reason that you may have this put in front of you. So the three big reasons to have a prenup: one, this is your second marriage and you don't want to have to go through a messy divorce again. Reason two, you've got significant other assets that you want to protect. Reason three, you're getting pressure from outside family members, and it's just going to make things easier to clarify upfront. So there are a lot of things going on. There are a lot of options that you'll have if you're even considering this. And so, what do you do if you even want to bring this up? This can be a difficult topic. You'll want to think about this. You may want to talk to your family members first. I know when I was getting married, I brought it up once only as I don't think we need this. And my wife shot back, no, of course we don't. It could be that simple that you just don't need to worry about anything. But it is an area where if you're thinking about it, you do want to talk to somebody before you make sure that you leave it all on the table. Thanks so much for watching. If you've got other questions about this, go ahead and leave a question in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.